Thanks for coming. This is a workshop about lighting and lenses and how lights and lenses react to each other. Hosted and organized by Astera. Thanks so much. We have a couple of toys there, some lights to play with later, and the camera, some lenses. And I'm surprised to see so many people talking about lens flares. So welcome, thank you. So a bit of history. My name is Markus Förderer. I'm a cinematographer, and I think like my first feature film 12 years ago or so, I was like a post-apocalyptic film. The sun is so bright, you can't go outside anymore without protecting your skin. So we decided to overexpose like 5 stops and pick lenses that do crazy flares. And I started becoming a bit obsessed with lens flares ever since. So here's a bit of that knowledge over the years. There's a short intro, like a 1-minute clip to show you a couple of impressions. People always, when they talk about lens flares, many people think of whatever J.J. Abrams' Star Trek overuse. But there's so many more use cases, right? If you to enhance your storytelling and or to hit certain beats. And this is just a couple of clips from my recent films. It's just a 1-minute section. If you can dim the house lights for a moment. All right, yeah, lens flares for creative use, right? Like there's so many ways to use flares, not just as eye candy, but so there's a couple points we want to talk about. I don't try to do it briefly so we can do some hands-on time and some lighting. Lens flares is a storytelling tool. What is a lens flare? I think most people know. We keep it very, not much technical, but more on the creative side, hopefully. How do lens flares occur? Types of lens flares, characteristics of lens flares under different lighting techniques. Then I show my long-term passion project for the first time today. I hope you like it. And a hands-on demonstration and some questions. Thank you. All right, lens flares. Super interesting. When you go back, we all know flares from photography and cinematography, obviously, but even painters use, this is from 1895, from Peter Monstedt. So photography was already around, so it's a good question. He's not around anymore to ask him. Was he influenced by photographs? Maybe he even took a black and white photo and painted it of this, or because the eye itself, right, we have a couple of lens elements. There's some glaring, I see it right now, but nothing quite like this. So this might have been inspired by photography that was around already. Like here's a closer look. You see the flare on high contrast edges, right, dark background. So it's clearly like a stylistic tool. In this case, maybe to convey beauty and something calm and peaceful. That's another example from 1904. Very similar. You see the high contrast edge. That's where the flare reads the most. So very much like it would show in photography. And that's the more recent 1918. So color photography was invented way earlier, but I think it became more apparent. Like here you see more defined flare with color variations on that high contrast edge in the tree. And it's quite interesting, right? Like when you come now talk about photography and cinematography, some people hate flares, some people love flares. why would you choose to put something in? Like in painting, it doesn't necessarily make sense at all, right? It's a creative choice. A quick 2-second technical thing, that's a lens. Has lens elements, right? How does a flare occur? In a perfect world, a lens designer would hope the light from the left side goes straight through the glass, gets focused and projected on the imager, be it film or digital. But in real world, there's several lens elements to correct for certain aberrations, and every surface, air-to-surface gap, creates the potential to like disperse the light, scatter the light, so you will see a reflection of each surface, and the more elements, the more the reflections get magnified. So you create, in a way, like a ghost image, like a out-of-focus image, and it really shows with a bright light source. If it's a light in the shot, the sun itself, or some lighting fixture, you will see the hot spot most apparent, and the rest is hidden within the texture of the image itself. And actually, like for people who love math, like there's modern lenses have multi-layer coating, right? Only 0.2% of the light gets reflected off each surface, but older single-coated or uncoated lenses, only 4 to 5% of the light actually is reflected off each surface. So lens designers try to maximize the light hitting the film, right, to have a fast lens, so they try to multi-coat. So the more modern lenses tend to show less lens flares. I think it's not necessarily the lens manufacturers trying to prevent lens flares, that might be too, but they also want to make a fast, clean lens, so by that they kill the flare, so to say. So what is a lens flare, right? It is a reflection of a bright light source, the ghost image I just mentioned. And everybody thinks immediately, maybe if you think of a lens flare, of some anamorphic streak flare or some spot flares, circular shapes. But flares happen in many variations, from very subtle, like this is some wave breaking in Hawaii and the sun behind it. So at first, maybe most people might not be able to point their finger that there's actually a flare happening. But of course, a bright light against a darker edge, a high contrast edge, is creating some form of glare that lowers the contrast. And I think we perceive this as a viewer as fairly normal. We wouldn't say, oh my God, there's an aberration or a problem. I think quite the opposite. It looks very natural and pleasing. If you would completely, like here you see this gentle glow, take this out and you would have a perfect representation of this sharp edge, it might look maybe technically more real, but not in our human perception, I would say. That's another example in Shanghai. I took this from scouting on a skyscraper. It's a foggy landscape, so that you don't see the apparent like circular spot flares or anything like this, but still, because there's such a bright light source in the shot, the sun, obscured by fog, you have some sort of ghosting which lifts the blacks, and that creates a certain depth, like in addition to the fog happening here. That's some other example where you already see a form of ghosting, like the sun reflected off axis, and some more. Like flares come in hundreds of different variations. It really depends on the type of lens and a very important type of light, right? Being it a spotlight, like a point light source, a soft source, anything in between. That's a very fun Voigtlander Zoomar. There's recently a rehousing project which brought it back to life. It's actually the first ever full-frame zoom lens ever made. I only learned about it this year, and it looks amazing. It's like they can't make lenses like this anymore. They really get so much right. It's full-frame, an odd range, but it creates very warm flares, very pleasing if you go for a certain look like this. So this is another form of a flare, which might look at first like the sun's, it's called like a starburst. It might look like a starburst of flare spikes, but it is actually shot through a window of a plane, and it's little ice crystals on the window, which create this kind of scattering effect. So I would consider it more like a filter flare. If you put a piece of glass with any form of diffusion, you can manipulate your flare, which might look like a lens flare, but it's technically a filter flare. That's also something, obviously, you all know to watch out for when you're shooting whatever car light, like you point your camera at night into car headlights and you use filtration. There might be something pleasing happening, or you see some weird ghosting of that image. Also very important, your capture medium. This is shot on 35mm film, looking straight into the sun. There's some glare happening, but the flare itself would look quite different on a digital camera because the film's ability to gently roll off into the highlights creates more like of a glare, soft, gentle roll off. Like in addition of the roll off of the film, the flaring of the lens, they all go together. And digital cameras tend to clip more in a linear way, right? Even if you use a certain film emulation LUT, you might not get this kind of flaring. So that's important to keep in mind. That's a very fun phenomenon I learned from Jay Holman. If you know his amazing CineLens manual, he's describing an effect called narcissism, when the lens actually, the light is captured coming through the lens. It's a very small point source, right? The sun far away at infinity. And the light is reflected back either off the sensor glass or an internal element of the lens, hits the rear side of the iris, and this is actually a reflection of the rear side of the iris back onto the sensor, and it's being captured. They call it lens, people call it narcissism. Lens designer. So lens connoisseurs. That's some sort of streak flare. It might look similar if you remember from the film days, gate flare, when you have a light source just outside your frame and it breaks on the gate. This looks kind of similar, but it's not. It's actually shot on digital. That's some old lens. The sun is slightly out of the shot, creating the streak. And there's hundreds of different variations, even if you think you know certain lenses, how they behave under certain circumstances. This, for example, on a plane, I saw this randomly. I thought, what's going on? This is a blend of like the sun coming through the windows, almost center hitting the lens. And it's a blend of a real lens flare and a sensor flare. So the light hits the sensor and gets scattered, and you see almost, there's a Bayer pattern and micro lenses on the Bayer pattern. It's as if you almost can see a magnified Bayer pattern. You see the green, blue, red, quite fascinating. Sometimes you discover happy accidents, or you find it's not appropriate, so it's very important always to test your lenses and the right light source, what you end up using, what kind of color temperature, what kind of softness. And then always people ask me like what to look out for in a lens flare, right? Especially when talking to a director or other creatives who might not be so familiar with all these different kind of lenses available. And I think there's a lot of technical terms, but for me, most important, like from a creative point of view, is really the size, the shape, the position in the framing. Certain flares, it really depends on the light source and the position of the light source and the type of lens used. What kind of shape do you get? Do you get a soft, gentle shape that is barely perceptible, or is it some sharp, defined oval or circle where like even my mom could point her finger and say, there's something happening here, right? So do you want to be that expressive or something more gentle? Color obviously is a cool flare, warm flare, and the quantity of flares. Is it like a single, or you have a whole Christmas tree of things moving? And movement, very important, right? If you shoot handheld or you have a dolly shot and you work with a light hitting your lens, obviously depending again on the size of the light source, the distance to your camera and the type of lens, you will get either gentle moving flare or something that's quite dynamic, which could be great for an action sequence, right? And add some dynamic and drama, or it could become distracting. And that's, I think, right, always up to us to determine, is this now appropriate or not? Or do you want to play it safe and shoot with a very clean lens and play with it in post, or not at all? And that leads to flare as a happy accident. I think that's so important, what I learned over time, like by testing early on with your director, show them examples. Are they comfortable with a lens that has its own life, and with a lighting style? If you work a lot with backlight and hard light especially, are they comfortable embracing what I call happy accidents? And if you do it right, you can create your own happy accidents, right? If you set up the right lenses, your right blocking, you can make sure that you run into happy accidents and embrace them if you like them, or use a matte box if you don't like them. Types of lens flares. That's like a bit of a technical term, but also good to think about. Like there's something called a starburst. I'll show some examples in a bit. Wheeling glare, narcissism, what I showed earlier. These either the lens barrel or parts of the lens reflected back, or the iris. Rainbow flare, sensor flare, gate flare, which is more like not a typical lens flare, and the traditional spherical spot flare, and of course anamorphic flares. People always, I think at first maybe at anamorphics and the traditional streak flare. So this is an example of starburst. This is a Cooke S4. On the left, it's wide open. This is shot on I think an early Alexa. So sometimes when you have a very small point source, a sensor might create some interesting things, like what you see here, some kind of column array, depending, because the lens is wide open, if you stop ever so slightly down, it will behave already differently. And this is stopped down on the right side to a T4, and you see this traditional starburst. Not every lens will do this. It really depends on the shape of the iris. And if you use a very large soft light source in the frame, you might not see this, but on a smaller point light source, like a Fresnel or something, or the sun, you will see a starburst. This is the narcissism I described earlier. There's a handful of lenses which do this quite nicely. And it's basically, in this case, that's a Bausch & Lomb Super Baltar 35. If you stop down, you see the lens, the iris reflected back. Very important, very basic, but good to think about. Every flare has an axis, like it goes obviously from the light source if you have it in the frame, and moves accordingly to the opposite of the frame. So on the right side you see actually like a computer-generated flare. They tend to be, even in this day and age, fairly clean unless you shoot your own plates and overlay them. On the left side, this is a Kawa Cinematographer, which has a very gold, I call it gold coating. Like the image itself does not look yellow. This is neutral white light, but the flare suddenly becomes warm and golden. So there's an axis. That's what I talked about earlier about movement to watch out for. Like if you have a very wide lens and you use a, let's say, zoom lens that has a lot of lens elements, and you work with hard backlight, and you do quick pan, you might see a very dynamic movement of lots of little dirt dots and circles that might not be in your best interest, or you love them and go for it. That's an example of wheeling glare, right? It's more like a softer lifting the blacks, which can be very helpful. This is an example of the influence of the lens coating itself. Is a split screen of a size super speed. On the bottom, the contrasty one is the regular coating of the super speed. The top left is uncoated. The coating was actually polished off. That's why you even see scratch marks, like magnified. So it's the same light source. This is exactly shot in the same conditions, but the flare reacts very differently in color. Speaking of color, the left is this Cinematographer with the golden flares. On the right side, this is the size super speed. It's exactly the same light source, daylight balance, 5,600 Kelvin, but you get a very different effect. But the skin tone or a test chart might look very similar. Like at some point it overlays and washes it out, but there's some interesting effects happening. You can even see in a flare, like chromatic aberration, will the lens, if you use a hard light source, will, like when I do lens testing and you shine a hard light into your lens, you will see the tendency is there chromatic aberration. Even without filming a test chart, you can see it at the edges of frame, like here, this rainbow, where the white light gets scattered in the individual wavelengths. That's a traditional, like anamorphic horizontal flare. We all associate them with being blue, but there's a million colors, from green, cyan, warm, yellow, white. And then we'll show this later. You can vastly manipulate the color of your flare. People always think, oh, this lens had that certain flare color. I don't like it for that project. But you can really, if you're using LED lighting and you have control over the individual color channel, you can determine how saturated, which color, and whatnot you want to play with. This is an interesting effect. You see aperture ghosting. It's not really a flare, but it affects the appearance of the flare. Usually if you're wide open, the iris is completely retracted in the lens barrel. God, I sound like some lens technician, but trust me, I don't know what I'm talking about. But so it's usually, when you shoot wide open, you wouldn't see this effect. When you stop down, you slowly see the iris, the geometry of the iris itself. Most modern lens manufacturers try to create the perfect circular iris. So you are not noticing anything like this, but the true vintage lens connoisseur will appreciate whatever hectagon or whatever shape or what traditional Cook lenses do. And this changes drastically by the position of your light source in the frame. All right, so this is now I think what I really want to talk about. And there will be, we should please, if you have any questions between, jump in. But we are also there's a question already in the dark. We have some Q&A time later, but if you have something for now, please jump in. No, like a rainbow, like the chromatic aberration as it can show in the flare, but rainbow flare is its own thing, I would say. Like it's a flare that splits the white light. I'll have examples coming in a minute. It splits the light into a rainbow, but the chromatic aberration is just happening of some lens elements dispersing the light in a different way. I have some examples in a moment. So like creatively, how can you use lens flare for storytelling besides like what I mentioned, eye candy and beauty? So like one thing is if you want to evoke a sense for nostalgia, beauty, obviously eye candy, like everybody knows. In a commercial, if you don't know what to do, you flare the lens and something fun will happen, right? You want to evoke a certain period. If you shoot a film that takes place in the 70s, and you might want to experiment with lenses from that time. Also important, lighting from that time. If you hit the lens with tungsten lighting, will react quite differently from modern daylight, HMI, or LED lighting. You can help the audience identify your genre, right? You have an opening shot in a film. If you have an horizontal blue flare, they might get a sense immediately this must be a sci-fi movie in a certain context, right? Because we're so used to certain genres using certain lenses, and the flare is I think one of the most prominent indicator what type of lens is used. Visual effects, obviously, have some examples. Emulating flares to make some full CG scenery feel like it was actually photographed, or hiding layers in their composite, how they have to blend stuff. A flare will always help to keep the eye busy, so to say, right? And even computer games, you see artists who create computer games emulating lens flares, even if there's no camera at all, but I think they use it maybe to evoke a sense of cinematic imagery, or also for action and dynamic, because it just maybe heightens the experience for the player. And even animated films, you see, right? Some Pixar films or other films use lens flares just to make you feel like this was actually captured with a camera, and maybe you're more the same. Like in a narrative like film, you might feel more at ease if you feel you're not watching a documentary. There's not a real world. There's a story being told, and by feeling the camera, or in this case the lens, helps you. Some examples of beauty, right? Like just this is like a flare lifts the blacks. If you put the light source into the shot, in this case the sun, it lifts the blacks, creates nice silhouettes. That's a very interesting example of, I call it a hero halo. Like if you want to have a heroic moment, like this is an example from Resident Evil, very interesting. Low angle, put the sun in the shot, it creates almost like this halo, and makes the hero appear bigger than life. That's another example of AI, just to where it's really appropriate in the scene, hard to describe. That's an example of the visual effects compositing. this is apparently it's a I think film called The Hills Have Eyes. You can tell a bit by the edges that this was composited. The lens flare in real life would have been in front, because it occurs in the lens, would have been in front of the house. They would cover it. So they did a gentle mistake here, but it's not obvious at first. But still, it helps to bring life to it. Probably they realized this doesn't look right. The sun in real life was probably way above the edge of frame, but it helps to keep the shot busy. Science fiction, obviously, people associate certain types of flares with sci-fi. More beauty stuff, that's from Red Notice. Actually, this whole sequence is like towards the end of the film. We shot on a yacht. We had a scene on a yacht, a very romantic scene. They kiss and block the sun and whatnot. But we shot it in front of an LED volume, and putting the light directly into the shot helped also add a sense of realism. And that's what you could traditionally not do or wouldn't want to do with a green screen. The visual effects supervisor would probably slap your fingers. Don't go too crazy on the flares, because it's going to be hard to key. But if you use a volume or any sort of photo backdrop, the flare can really help. Like in visual effects, it can help you hide the background, and the audience doesn't really have to see it. It will feel that it's there, hopefully. That's like a film I shot a couple of years ago called Bliss. It's on Amazon. There's two worlds going on. One like ugly world, we call it, and one is like a heightened, beautiful, real world. And we tried to, with the director, Mike Cahill, we brainstormed what can we do to separate them. We chose to shoot one anamorphic, the other spherical, but that wasn't obvious enough. So we used very saturated LED lighting in the beautiful, like the real world, to have stronger colors, and that still wasn't enough, like in testing. So we came up with, it's like what I call a prism flare. It's like it's not a real prism, but it is scatters light into its spectrum and does some interesting stuff to the image. That's an example from what we call the ugly world, which is the flares make the image washed out. Like, this is an extreme example, but the colors, also the type of coloring, the lighting we used was more neutral colors, and that's the amazing thing about LEDs, right? You can dial in your saturation, your color balance, and the flare will react accordingly. This is again the same film back in that real world, which is supposed to, it's like totally made up, but it's supposed to feel so much richer and real, even if there's like rainbows flying around, and there's some twist at some point, so this hopefully makes sense at the end why it looks so slightly heightened. That's from Independence Day Resurgence, where I think in this scene it helped to convey like a sense of mystery, like Jeff Goldblum and his crew are entering an abandoned spaceship for the first time, and it's very dark and silhouetted, and we helped reveal the character with a flare, basically lifting the blacks in the right moment by hitting so we had this was actually stunt people behind the actors, so that was helpful. They are very precise. If you have your regular extra, they might be a bit more crazy, but because these are stunt professionals, they know how to point a gun, and we mounted the light on their gun. I could tell them specifically at that moment, point your gun directly into the lens, and then we could go 3, 2, 1, and they hit it in the right moment. So it's handy to be good with your close with your stunt department. That's that early movie I mentioned in the beginning. It's called Hell. It's a German language film, post-apocalyptic. Hell in German means bright. Hell means bright hell. And I have actually a short clip. So it was a very small independent film, and we didn't have big visual effects budget, and also wanted it to feel as real and gritty. So we tried to get as much in camera. Wait, where's the clip? That's not a clip. I think it's coming later. Sorry for that. Lighting techniques. That's where the clip is hidden. So right, yeah. How do you create flares? You shine a flashlight in your lens. That's pretty straightforward, but not every every scene the actors running around with a flashlight. So this is behind the scenes of a film called The Colony. We didn't want extreme flares in that sequence, but so we had a condor with strong mole beams. In the real shot, they're out of frame, but at a certain point, the character escapes and runs through that narrow bridge, and we wanted to create this light wash effect and made sure, using no matte box and positioning the light on the condor in a certain angle, that as we pass the bridge, we would create this short bling indicating now they're escaping and they're coming to the outside world, so to say. That's an example from Hell. So there's these prisoners, they're in a barn, and it's like high noon outside. It's way too dangerous to go outside, but yet they want to escape and risk their lives going outside where it's so bright and dangerous. And we had a couple of 18K HMIs, but I quickly realized while setting up the shot, there's nothing as strong as the sun itself, and it was luckily a sunny day. And we just employed a couple shiny boards outside and really hit the actors and the camera. And by going, like I was running a handheld outside with those actors, and I was going through the same, hopefully, experience that the audience will feel as blinded as they are while being literally sunburned from those shiny boards. Like I think there's 4 of them, and they're all focusing on one lens. That was hot. That's another example from that film. Sometimes you run out of daylight, and you might have to call it a day, so to say. But in this case, we had some dust, a strong 18K HMI, and positioning the camera in a certain angle, flare the lens, gave us another half hour to shoot, even if the sky was almost pitch black. But it was very limiting, but I got a couple of shots that made it in the film. And here's that clip from the opening sequence where the character, for the first time, leaves the car. The car is all blacked out with newspapers, and they only see through a narrow gap in the window what's outside. And this is pretty much all shot in camera. I'll show in a moment how this was done. And of course, we did testing before. How extreme can we go with flaring the lens? Is it too much? When is it too much? And whatnot. But this, for example, we had to shoot this film in the springtime in Germany when the trees didn't have any leaves because the sun was so strong it was supposed to burn everything. So we had to commit to shoot early in the year. It was overcast and raining most of the time. And when we arrived at this location, and I knew I checked the weather, I told the producer we have to push this to another day. There's no way this is going to look apocalyptic, sunny, and there was no other way. So we shot it anyways, and I brought in a negative close to the actors here, and we had 2 lights, one to hit the car and the other one to specifically hit the talent and shoot straight into the lens. It was more like born out of necessity, but it ended up, like if the lens flare is gone, immediately you would feel like gray, overcast sky. But this really helped save it and then pushed us to go in a more extreme direction for the rest of the film. So it was, in a way, a nice, happy accident. That's another example. So sometimes, same film, overcast day, we didn't want to paint out those green trees, so we had one electrician with a small portable light walking with me, and we would constantly talk a bit lower, higher, move it, don't move. There's a quick question, please jump in. On this project, a mix. I had some Zeiss super speeds, and zoom was very important for us, and that's and being small. So many factors, not just what does the best flare. Small and light, portable, and zoom. So we ended up using the old Red zoom. Red made like small zooms. I think it's rehoused still lenses. They're super compact, and they flared, in my opinion, 10 times nicer than some more expensive options in the rental house. So we chose that. I was a bit worried too, like people think you're crazy, like you can rent all these big ass nice zooms, but I felt this was the right mix. So in this case, there's dust in the air, we flare the lens, and back then this was still a small HMI, was it called a pocket power or something. Today we have all these amazing battery-powered lights. We would have been so much faster, so it's like really exciting times today to experiment. That's the case where it looks like it's shot and created the flares created by the projector, but I wanted to control the intensity and color, so we actually built below the prop, like it was a museum projector, we built a little box which had a modern, like an office-style projector, and I created some video which had an abstract pattern, so I could know most of the time there's no flare, and like leave a certain blind spot, and then at certain points the light would hit the lens, so to say. That's nice about projectors because it's so sharp and precise. So in the right moment, as the character is watching a very unpleasant video, in the beginning it's like beautiful and nice, and then it becomes more sinister as he's realizing what he's watching, so the flare disappears. Even that's the reverse shot of that scene. Even here, you might not see an apparent flare, but of course the lens is flaring. There's so much soft light coming in from the outside, and it's more like a Wheeling glare lifts the blacks happening here. This was on some shot on some vintage anamorphics. That's an example. Scene takes place in New York, and we couldn't shoot at the Stonewall Inn at Christopher Street. We couldn't shoot there, get a permit, or it would have been also too expensive. So we recreated this whole scene in a warehouse in Montreal. So everything you see here is built. Here's the behind the scenes. So the top is how it looks in the final film, and the bottom. So we used a big photo backdrop and an artificial sky, and all the visual effects people had to do on the wide shot to paint out the line of the truss and replace the sky. Obviously, add birds. It's a visual effect shot. And by having the sun in the shot, I think it really helped to make it work. Like we positioned the light directly behind that tree. These trees are all fake. Put in some artificial wind into the trees, and by seeing that pattern and having a real lens flare helped sell the illusion, even if we're indoors, hopefully, to convey a sense that we are actually on an outdoor location. And this way, director can shoot 24/7. That's good or bad. Sometimes you might want to avoid flares, right? And it depends, obviously, the intensity of your light, the type of lens. So in this case, that's from Independence Day Resurgence. We had this big helicopter establishers, and we wanted to shoot at dusk. So I was in a helicopter with a zoom lens and a pilot, amazing pilot, Fred North, and the director, Roland, was in a pursuit vehicle on the ground, so we shoot simultaneously in that short time frame where the sky has the right light, and I knew it would be too risky to. We shot anamorphic as the main format, and it would be too risky as the light level drops, and we might hit pitch black night to get these too strong anamorphics and for those wide shots. So I actually chose in the helicopter to go with a spherical lens, a spherical zoom that has stronger coating, and on top of it, to make sure that on the ground we had an anamorphic camera. We basically dusted down, added dirt and dust to the headlights, so the top is all like LED lights disguised as like these practicals that would help to fan out light into the environment. And for the strong headlights, even I taped little pieces of tape on the hotspot to make sure there's no, you don't get any spot flare, which could be distracting in this case. In other cases, you maybe want to make sure you get a flare. This is from a project I shot last year in Bangkok. There's some abandoned, amazing house, and this is behind the scenes. The characters in the scene came down the stairs, and I wanted to make sure they have a very impactful entrance. So what you see there, which looks like a sun cracking through the outside, is literally an LED light on a C-stand in the middle of the shot. I didn't even try to hide it because I knew it's going to be slightly out of focus, and the flare itself will help to disguise and cover the lamp itself. So sometimes it's good just to be bold and put the light in a shot. That's an example about science fiction I talked about earlier. It's a movie called The Colony. We shot in this tight landscape in northern Germany. It's literally like a wet desert. There's nothing else, no set pieces. We have just the main character, and I felt like having a certain anamorphic flare will help this very early in the film will help to set the tone that the audience will understand this takes place in some sort of future. But in this case, again, we didn't want to go for traditional blue flare. So this type of lens is like a vintage-coated modern anamorphic lens, has a more neutral color. And it would really pick the color of the daylight. So I'll show this later. And you can be very experimental with, like there's an example, we used the LED light, spotted into a reflector and diffracted it with some gel that created rainbows. And this shoots back into the lens to create this really wild rainbow flares. And that's amazing about LED lighting because you can really fine dial your saturation or shift your white point and create really interesting rainbows if you're into rainbows. Okay, that's a bit, I already talked about, a bit more abstract about the Lensflares. These are some example screenshots from my Lensflare database. I'll show you later a bit of stuff, just how do flares look like in real life. This is live, this is shot with a daylight balanced small point LED. It's like an Atlas Orion special flare coating, so there's very neutral white flares. This is an example of rainbow flare, so it's actually the light source is outside the frame, hits it in a certain angle, and the curvature of a certain lens element is like breaks up the white light into its spectrum, and you see these interesting freckles. Might be very fun and nice in one situation, or very distracting in another. So that's why it's really important to test. Or if you want to avoid something like this, happens only with hard light. Like if you put a diffusion in front of your light, and this effect would not show anymore because the rainbows technically still happen, but they cancel each other out because they're scattered through a softer source here as well. It's an elite anamorphic light in the center. There's a mixture of rainbow flare, and if you have a small light source, you can get really expressionistic with your flares. Or if you want to avoid it, rather go with a softer, larger source. Couple of examples. This again is that gold-coated Cinematographer. As you stop down, like this is stop down, you see, like I talked earlier, you can see the iris shapes. The iris shape, it's only one iris, as a like a masking effect on the flare itself. And here's a starburst and all the fun things we talked about. Spherical aberration, a lot of things. And here you see this is basically the chromatic aberration that shows in the flare. So the lens itself, if you do a high contrast image, you would see a certain chromatic aberration as well. But the flare alone gives it away. That sometimes, if there's no time for testing, I just put a light in a lens quickly. Gives you, in my opinion, 80% of what you have to know if you like the lens, and then you can do more testing with your talent and whatnot. All kinds of fun. Minolta rocker, really amazing. Discovered that as a new rehoused version, which brought them back to life. Look at this. So it looks almost computer generated, but there's a million different sizes and shapes depending. This is a uncoated or partially uncoated lens, depending on your light source and type of source. And now I want to quickly show you this test setup, what I usually do when testing lenses. I'm a bit extreme when it comes to this. So I realized years ago, you always see these test videos, a camera AC in a test room in front of a test shot, shining a flashlight around, and that shows you something, but every flare, every degree angle of change will make it so vastly different. So it's kind of difficult to compare, and I think you have to compare a flare or lens to another lens to make a decision. Do you like this more or that more, especially when talking to a director? So I created a platform where you can we shoot with motion control, and you can side-by-side compare flares. This is like, it looks like I'll show a preview of this. This is all shot with a daylight balanced LED, always the same distance, the same camera body, the same exposure, and it's shot with motion control. And because I kept showing it to some people over the last couple of years, and they pushed me, can you please make this usable public, because it only worked on my computer, an old version. So we rebuilt this and had some coders helping me, and we put it out today for the first time exclusively for you. Thank you. Thank you. It's called Cinematographer. So I'll show you quickly what that is, so you can go home, skip all the parties, and nerd out on Lensflares. So the idea is you can go on cineflares.com, and there's an exclusive sign-up. It's for free. Play with it. It's a beta version, so I'm trying to get feedback from you guys too, what to do with it, how can it be used, because this is the way I would use it, but there's probably curious to hear input. So there's the same amount of lenses on the left side and the right side. You can choose whatever Bausch & Lomb Super Baltar, that's the lens I showed earlier, and compare it to the Kawa Cineprominar in motion. And then on the top, you can select your focal length. I'm going to choose a 32, your T-stop, maybe T4, because I want to have some depth of field for that project. And select here the 35 equivalent, T4. And when you hit play, you'll see the light always moving in the same arc, 180 degrees. And thank you. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. And that's, again, this narcissism we talked about. Not only people are narcissistic, especially lenses are narcissistic. And you can compare the same lens to itself, wide open, stop down, what is spherical, what is anamorphic, and all that stuff. And we can chat about this later if you are interested. And now I would go on and play. We have got a nice selection of lights and cameras. We have a pixel brick, heliotube. You're probably most familiar with those. There's heliotubes in a snapback. And we have a camera. We have a couple of lenses. And Julie, who was like a very important asset making this website come to life, if you would help me, thank you. Thank you. Then let's play with some. I'll just make this go away. So, play with some cameras. All right. So, yeah, Julie, thanks for helping out on this. There's a camera. There's a 55mm anamorphic. I'll have some anamorphic because that might be quite fun to play with flares. And let me see. So maybe we start with. This is quite fun. So I learned about those recently. This is a battery-powered Fresnel, which is super awesome because go wireless, right? Especially when you play with flares, you want to, if you're strapped down to a stand and your light source and 5 cables to your DMX board and whatnot, if you're stuck there, your flare will look the way it looks like, and you might not have the time on the day of shoot to experiment and moving it around. So it's great to have something like this. You just point, if you can, just by maybe turn this on to like daylight color, 5600, and like you can really play to find a certain distance you like. Maybe you want to put the light in the shot outside the window, right? You maybe have some shears on the window to hide the light itself, or you want to be more careful and put it out frame. And you see every angle of degree will vastly change how strong. That's also why we shot this test in motion control, so you have a comparison. But in a real-life scenario, it's good to quickly, maybe if you have some time for pre-lighting, if you want to play with a flare, you find out where you want to have it, almost like walking around with your viewfinder and tell your grips, put the dolly here. You can tell the electrician's plates, make this live at that position. And it's really interesting how it changes. Like now I'm at the exact same position. I'm not moving. I'm just changing the focus of the light. And you will see that if you look at that horizontal flare on the top right, how even the lens does not focus or defocus, the flare gets bigger or smaller. I'm not coming closer or wider. This is obviously because this has a Fresnel, and as you focus, the Fresnel, the diameter of the Fresnel gets filled as you spot down, so the flare appears bigger. And then we could play with the color, for example. This was daylight. If we go to a tungsten setup, 3200 Kelvin, you will see the camera is still the same. The key light is still daylight. Can you double the key light to, if you don't mind, so the flare is not washing out the image. Exactly. So now we see it's exactly the same lens. You might not need a gold-coated lens that's in the back of a rental house. You can use whatever lens you have. If it's a flare-friendly lens to start with, and then let's say I don't want this. This is like this Wheeling glare which washes out the whole image. But if you go slightly off-center, you get certain geometric shapes. And now, as I would move the camera or I move the light, you see this is what I talked about, moving motion, obviously. The more the flare moves, the more the audience will become aware of it being there in the first place, and you might not want to put attention to it. So by using different focal lengths, you might get, or different types of lenses, you obviously get different flares. So maybe we try some other lights, because there's so many of them. What's interesting, or like this, for example, is the smaller version, the pixel brick. So you might not need a big Fresnel unless you balance with some other daylight sources. So again, small battery-powered light, so that the diameter of the lens is smaller. So it's more like a point source. It does not wash out the image as much. And if we go, for example, let's say, we want, like the director's calling for a blue flare to make it look like sci-fi. So my mom understands it's a sci-fi story. Can you make this primary blue, just a blue channel? And by still like lighting the talent with white light, maybe could we add this Pluto, also a daylight balance? Have another backlight, and I'll actually waste. Sorry for blind you guys. I'm gonna fix that in a second. Let's see. Oh yeah, isn't there some fun shutters? Let's see. So we can mask out the audience and rotate it. Wow. Okay. So, no, actually, I want to just hit Julie, and no audience. That's difficult. That's got to be a challenge somehow. Wow, possible. I hope you guys are not blinded. So I think we hit Julie. So there's a bit more of white light hitting you from the front to back. And now we can introduce a blue flare that does not hit you at all. Of course, sometimes it washes out the image. Maybe if we would stop down, this was at 2.8. Stop down and stop to T4. There will be, the iris obviously reduces the amount of ghosting happening in the image. So there's less. Like the bounced scatter light will be absorbed by more iris surface. So there should be no less Wheeling glare. So you get a blue flare, a blue streak flare, and if you do it right, without a blue face. That's that. There's probably other colors in the machine, but we don't have to try them all. Then maybe we swap the lens to a wider one, if you could help me here, Andy. The 40. So this was a 55 Hawk, 2x anamorphic, and which has insane close focus here. And this is a 40 Orion silver flare. This has a really neutral coating, so that the color of the flare is very neutral. So you can even shape it more with the color of your light. Let's see. How about focus? So this is a wider field of view, obviously. And let me just, for comparison, could you switch the pixel brick one more time to daylight? 56. He'll light you the way out this way. Just kidding. OK. So since it's wider, right, it's going to be more difficult to hide it off camera unless you decide to put it in a shot, because why not? But you see this has a different flare pattern just because the lens design is different, obviously. What stop are we on? T2.8. Maybe I'll go also to 4 like before. And this is more contrasty. And what's interesting, most people always think, right, flare, hard light, you point it, you get these strong flares. But what's really interesting is actually use soft light. And we have, this is a bunch of heliotubes combined in a softbox snapback. That's something really interesting to watch out for. Sometimes we use, right, like light modifiers like egg rates and some sort of light modifiers, and if you don't watch out, you will actually see the shape of the light modifier even when it's off frame. So usually I would say maybe not as pleasing, but could be a stylized effect. So I would say it's same like when you have people wearing glasses, you see that pattern, it will give away it's a movie set. So if we remove the egg crate, thank you. We have a more softer source, so you can gently, sorry Kevin, I'm gonna hop on your lap and just, maybe I go not wash out the screen, how about that? So, by either coming off the side, I have to, this is very contrasty because I'm stopped down to a 2.4, but let me go to T2.5, and maybe can we bring down the key light 20%, the tubes, and also if you maybe cut this in half, the Pluto with a projector, that's what it's called, right? A projector. It's pretty cool. Like you can really mask your light, and so. As I'm far away, it's a soft source, but it's still pretty defined. But obviously, by going closer, the light gets bigger in relative, so you can milk out your blacks, almost like a varicon or like flashing your film. And what's really cool is to, like, if you don't move it, people might not notice, right? But obviously, you can move it during the shot for the right moment. Or do effects like whatever. I just saw this amazing film with Sean Penn as a medic and lots of ambulance light. Like if you, could we switch this actually to like a police light effect or something like this? And without even seeing a car, maybe just by sound mix, right? You have a low budget thing or a pickup shot to do. You just have the sound effects. I'm not even hitting Julie, but by getting this in camera instead of, you could try to overlay this in post, I think it will just melt together better. And this is, because it's now so soft, I would say it's very gentle, right? You would not be able to point your finger on it if you're immersed in a story, hopefully. So it's quite well, but you can get more impressionistic if you do, let's say, the same on the tube without the softbox. It's like you could put this, carry this on a plane, right? And let me go this way and just, and you can just play with wherever you want it to come from. Since it comes from below, it shoots at the glass at the top, or if you do it from the top, it hits the glass at the lower part and stuff like this. I think these are all the light tools we wanted to play with for now. Maybe if we can turn on the house lights, we can jump to some questions, try out more stuff if you want to see it. But thank you. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, if there are any questions, please raise your hands, and there's microphones being thrown at you. Maybe here in the front, in the middle, in the white shirt.
Hi, test. Thank you so much. It was really super interesting. Thanks so much for the website. That's really amazing. I think it's amazing work.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Please.
Curious to try it out.
Thank you. I have to say, I had a lot of support. A lot of rental houses helped, and over the years, at different projects, different part of the world, I always collected and shot. And yeah, I'm curious. We can chat about it later if you have ideas. I'm curious to hear your ideas.
I have one question about the red notice still from before, because you said you shot it in a volume. Was that actually like the sun in the volume, like a plate or something, or was the flare from a lamp in the shot?
Fun fact, I don't know if I can tell this, but COVID happened. And I got married, and I thought, usually when you're working on film project to film project, you never can make any plans. And then COVID lockdown happened, and after a while it was clear there wouldn't be anything would happen for a while. So I thought, now is the perfect time to go on honeymoon. So we traveled, because for Red Notice, we scouted these amazing beaches in Sardinia, some of the most gorgeous beaches. We scouted from a helicopter, big show. So I knew, wow, this is amazing beach. So I thought, like, let's go for a honeymoon to this amazing beach. And then we beached for a couple days. You can beach. Did you learn this in Barbie? And then I realized, I think I should tell my director that I'm at our location, actually. So I texted him, hey, look, fun selfie. We're at this location. He's like, can we shoot some plates? Because we're supposed to pick up soon. And maybe we can composite that in. And then I thought, sure, like we found a local drone operator and shot some plates. Some with the sun in the shot and some establishing shots. And for the volume then, it wasn't a full volume, it was more like a slightly curved large video wall. I chose just the sky with the sun slightly outside the frame, and I put literally the lamp in the shot with the stand and didn't tell anybody. And then we lined it up and shot. And at the end of the take, I told the director, did you see that stand? He's like, what stand are you talking about? And I said, back there, I was like, oh, is this a problem? So, no, you didn't notice, it's not a problem. Because it's so out of focus. So if you don't know, sometimes good not to tell people. So it helped to have because even if in the plate the light comes slightly off camera, the hotspot and the flare of the lens itself created its own big halo, making the light look like it's come from that part of the ocean. Okay, any more questions? Maybe Oren here in the front.
Markus, I want to make you hijack your Lensflares seminar into a lighting seminar. Can you talk about the setup from Stonewall, the interior of the warehouse? What did you use as the sun source? Because the quality of it is so sharp and harsh that you would never guess that was an interior.
Yeah, this was actually M90s, because I thought back then we save a bit of money if we don't use 18Ks, but I learned later at a certain scale it doesn't make a difference anymore. But we shot on a soundstage, that means we controlled the exposure, and I knew M90 is plenty enough. But maybe most of you know, if you have this type of reflector, you have to be very careful because there's like multifaceted lenses. If you have any sort of gobo in front, like the trees, or a narrow gap in a window, you will reflect. It's like acts like an optic. You will reflect the shape of the reflector onto the scene, which looks very unnatural. So sometimes we use the ever so slight diffusion close to the light to just break that reflector. Now with strong LEDs getting more and more powerful, if you're in a dark soundstage and you can set your exposure, you have a super fast camera, you don't even need a 9K. You could do whatever, like 1200 watt or something. But unfortunately, that was not color tunable. We had, there was dichrotic filters, which went in front that are heat resistible, so we could warm it up a bit. But I didn't use tungsten, so I'm a bit allergic to tungsten lighting. Some people just do tungsten lighting. You show me a tungsten light, I feel motion sickness or something like that. My eyes are daylight balanced for some reason. All right, any more questions? Maybe here at the side? Yeah.
Just curious what focus distance you use for all of the tests on the website.
Yes, it's 1.40 meters, so it's about, my brain's not working, 4 or 5 feet. I chose it, I shot this totally in the beginning just for me. I thought, how would I do it? I don't care if it's technically correct. I thought if I would shoot a person most of the time, there's a certain distance where the person is in focus. No, wait, the focus distance is the focus distance is at 4 feet, not at infinity, because you rarely shoot at infinity focus unless you do a wide shot. So I did, how would it look 90% of the time in a movie? You have your focus on your cast, on your talent, and then the light was double the distance from that focus distance, not at true infinity. Because again, I thought like when you're in a room, a bedroom, you have a lamp, this is kind of, and at a certain distance it doesn't make that much difference if your light source is small enough. So we have a daylight balanced special LED that has the right size. It took some experimenting until we figured it out. Thanks for your question. Any more questions? Maybe Seth in the front and then the gentleman up here next.
If you're working with a director for the first time, how do you establish a shared language with flares? What you presented as far as the breakdown of them was phenomenally helpful, but do you go through like this presentation with a first-time director, or how do you establish that?
Yeah, no, I think that would probably be overkill, and I'd say this guy's crazy. So I usually I use this for my own background research. If like before going to rental house for a certain project, I might compare 2 or 3 options and narrow it down to say these 3 could be interesting candidates to audition, and then show the director. So then, once I played with this in the Lensflare machine, so to say, I call up the rental house. Can we set up a test, and then you bring a double or maybe even an actress already, a costume or something. Pick the right light. If you know already you're going to have some flames, try to get flames, or you want to be daylight balance or tungsten, or it's going to be neon colors. Bring the right light sources to test so the lens reacts appropriately. And then only then I show this. And usually doing post-production when it comes to, if it's a visual effects heavy film and we talk about you have to emulate something, sometimes you're forced to shoot something cleaner, and then visual effects tells you we put it on later, and then they do some high-end generic flare, but then it's still, you can show them, and then also the director, look, this looks cool, you like it? Yes. And then you nail down the visual effects department, say, that's what we want. Good luck. And of course, we shoot a plate, you can overlay it, but sometimes they still try to use some plugin because they can track it to the light, but I always prefer using the real deal, even if it's not fully moving in the right axis, but you comp on something that's real photographically captured. Thanks for your question. Then there was a question up here. Hello, can we have a microphone? Don't throw it, Seth. That was a joke.
Hello. When we shoot with candlelight, there is a certain kind of flare, which sometimes it is a bit distracting. So I wanted to know a bit more about that, and maybe how to avoid it and how to use it creatively.
I mean, it really depends again, right? What lens do you choose? I see sometimes candlelight flare, especially if maybe it's a longer lens, and then it's an offset. Sometimes it's a filter that you see the candle sharp reflected with a slight offset. Could be, depending on the camera you use, a reflection of the IR cut filter, or in the sensor stack, right? There's glass in front. So the interesting fact is, I learned so much this year too on other amazing lens seminars, and that lens manufacturers tend to design lenses tail-centric. I'm not a lens designer, so correct me, Seth, if I'm wrong. But in my theory, by shooting straight parallel lenses back at the glass, reflecting back, might cause some issue. Like, you have to experiment with the kind of, if you know you have candle scenes, for sure, go in a test room, bring a candle. You might think, I'm going to shoot with a 35 most of the time. You don't need to test every lens, but your most common lenses, take a look. Stopping down might not help if it's this offset. The opposite might be better, to actually open the iris so you lower contrast on that type of flare. I hope that helps. Then maybe one to the far right, please, the gentleman.
I really liked the prism flare you were describing in that aerial shot, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on how you created that, especially in an aerial.
That's a very good question. We did a lot of testing. This is quite something unique we came up with. it's a flat prism. Let's put it this way. We put it on a drone, and it was a last-minute decision because I thought for those drone shots we put it on. We shoot an element in front of black and comp it on, and then I talked to the director while we were on this boat waiting for something. Why don't we put it on a drone? And I said it's gonna look a bit crazy, but are you willing to commit? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. And then it's some sort of filtration prism. So you might notice prism things you can hold in front of a lens and do out of flats. It's something like this in flat. It doesn't. I can show you a picture maybe later. It's something weird. Okay, sorry for not being too specific. Top lady with the hat. Top row. And if we have more than one microphone, we can already hand a microphone to the gentleman in the front in the blue. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, what's the question?
I have two questions. One is for your Cineflares. What source did you use? And the other question is, you use LED lights right now, but they always bring the little color aberration as well because they have color pixels in them. Is there a way to block it, or does the HMI always win in that part?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many flavors of LEDs. So LED is not like LED. Modern LEDs like these have multiple base pixels. Do you call them color engines, or I don't know? How many primaries do you have in the tube, for example? 5. Yeah. So 5 color pixels. In my opinion, I know what you're talking about, especially on profile, earlier generation profile lenses. When you project a very sharp spot, you kind of see, especially when you create a shadow or a sharp edge, you see at the edges some sort of fringing or projection of the actual LED engine, so to say. But I don't notice it at all anymore in these later generation. If you notice something, let's say, like there's basically a slight diffuser built in to scatter all these individual pixels. If you still see something, add a little bit of ever so slight diffusion, like a Hampshire frost or something, or there's even clip-on diffusion pieces. That usually takes it away. But I am so lazy, I rather use... Like HMI have all kinds of other problems, like too many problems. So I only use them if I have to. But I know what you're talking about. There's so many different LED lights. You have to really, you have to test your lenses, test your LED light, and if you can narrow it down so you don't use 5, 6 different types of manufacturers on one project. But here the beauty is they're all kind of copy-paste. You can create a certain look in a color. Even this was not daylight balance, but with Julie, when we work together, she's a board operator. We sometimes, on a weekend at home, she brings a tube and has a big Grand Amé on the hotel room table, and we pre-program a couple of presets and lights and colors, and then I know the next day on the set we can just copy-paste the same in all of those if you use the same type of lighting. I hope that helps. Long answer.
And your light source used?
It's a daylight balanced. It's not a film light. It's also something we kind of built for that process. I want to make sure it doesn't flicker. It is always the same. I can't quite. It's nothing you can get off the shelf. It's something we created. Sorry for not being too specific. I love to share all the details. That light source is. We did a lot of testing to get the right size at that distance because otherwise we would have to put the light at infinity. It's a daylight balance LED. Sorry, that's all I can say for now. That's a very nice spectrum, white color. Yes. There was one blue. Yeah, here, please.
Can you tell us more about your Lensflare machine, as you named it?
Yes.
How
it's
big is it?
the dark room. It's too big, but it takes some time to set up. There's motion control. It is several generations. I did 10 years ago until I figured out, I think during COVID, how to make it more usable. It's basically, it's pitch black. There's just one light source, daylight balanced, at a certain distance, and the trick is really you have to be very careful to not introduce any stray light, otherwise you hit the lens, and you have to be careful. Everything is timecode synced to not run out. When you use the tool, it's usually, you always have in spherical an 18, 35, 50. I didn't always do full sets because I think it's overkill to compare. So when you compare an 18 to an 18, different manufacturer, they will perfectly line up. If you do 50 to 50, they'll perfectly line up. If you compare to an anamorphic, you have to do a 35 anamorphic to compare with an 18 spherical to get the same angle of view. And then they're all, so it's kind of semi-automated, takes a bit of time to sync and then put in there. It's technically, it's a very pitch black room. Yeah.
And is it in your garage at home, or?
It can travel. Let's put it this way. And I have two of them for safety persons. Yeah. Yes, please, here in front. If you have a microphone for the gentleman in front.
So, did you notice any problems when using the lamp that there is gel on it, or any kind of foil, because it is not, perfectly flat surface? Yeah, is it affecting the flare anyway?
If you use gel in general, good question. I know you can create some fun reflections of gels, which you can shoot into the lens, but I like definitely if it's just a color gel. I would say, unless it's an old, very wrinkly one, it might add like some diffusion layer, but I'm not aware of any changes. Slight diffusions will vastly change it, and the distance, obviously, to the lamp and the lamp surface. That helps.
Thank you.
Any more questions? There's a gentleman. We do it as far as possible, so there's a lot of energy in the room. We have a gentleman here. Does somebody have a microphone already up there? So, no, you're already there in the front.
When you showed us the lenses, there was always some kind of red part in the flares. Was it because of the red sensor? How much does the sensor affect the flare?
Right here?
Yes.
The sensor, it's usually the IR cut filter like this. I mean, I want to stick to lighting as much as possible, but this Raptor has a very efficient IR cut filter. I try to stay on the artistic side, but there's several. Every camera manufacturer uses different IR cut filter, and every generation of sensors using usually different IR cut filter. This one is amazing. In older generation red cameras or some other cameras, you might see a red, slight magenta reflection in certain angles. In this one, because when I put this on the motion control, I did not see any red reflections like the magenta. So what we saw today must have been from a lens element.
Okay.
If that helps.
Yes, I have a little question here.
Yes.
Over here.
Hello.
Hi. Being the lens flare nerd that you are, have you ever gone too crazy on flares on a shoot, and then you were in post-production like, oh shit, is this, what did you do?
Good question. Like, usually I try to, like all these testing flares, like in a lens flare machine, I try to pick a lens that I feel like has character and the right character, but then I go into the production thinking I will never ever use a flare in camera. It's just I saw, this kind of flare characteristics means the blacks are not too crushed, there's a little life happening as you move with a Steadicam through a scene, right? I never really intend in the beginning to use any flares, but then it's more like an intuitive thing on the day. You might arrive at a location and you start pre-lighting and you see the blocking with the actor, and then you feel like there's something we could enhance with. But it's so important, right, when you work with actors and a director to not slow down the process with some technical trickery. Like that's why it's important to have like lights like this that are so flexible. I can quickly check, this would be cool. Maybe I tell my gaffer, can we pre-mount this, drill this there, so it's ready if we need it, and then you, on the board or your iPad, you ramp it up when you need it and do a gentle flare. So I try to improvise there, but you have to be also prepared so you don't improvise too much that you slow down the whole process. But in general, it's so I don't really like flares that much. So you have to be very sparse when using them. But it's good to know when to use them. Yeah. There's a famous DP who says like, I hate flares. I can quote him very famous. Thank you. I think we have time for one last question, then we have to move on. But we'll be around, and you can find us maybe at the Astera booth and have more questions. Who has the most pressing question? The gentleman in the front left, if you have one microphone. Yeah, thanks. The microphone is coming. Watch this. It's over here in the front left.
I was just wondering what percentage of the flares that you have actually used in the films, what percentage were like happy accidents, like you were talking, or what percentage were like actually created?
Yeah.
And if they were like, is it as rewarding to you when it's created, or is it more rewarding when it's really like just blocking or chance or sun changing?
Yeah, I enjoy the most, like I said, if you put the right ingredients together to harvest a lot of happy accidents, but if it then happens. So if you choose, like Red Notice, for example, that shot where the two kiss on the yacht, I plan to use the sun in the shot. I plan to use some sort of flare at some moment, but that it would really, it's kind of stylized that they'd really put the light into the center of the shot. Happened almost out of necessity. When pre-lighting had stand-ins, and I realized something is lacking. Let's put the light there. It looks great, and because we picked already lenses that I know in case we flare them, they would be fairly pleasing and maybe not too distracting. So that came together, but usually I appreciate a happy accident. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming. Thank you, Astera. Thank you.